So we asked ChatGPT whether it is ethical. And obviously, I won't read all of this, but the highlights are that it mentioned that it doesn't possess any ethical values. However, it lies in the user of this data in determining what is ethical. And we want to preface our presentation with this because we want to stress investments in companies that are ethical throughout all verticals, horizontals, as well as within each stakeholder. Hi, my name is Tanya, and this is Sneha, and we're going to talk about generative AI in healthcare. So this is our agenda for today.
We wanted to make sure that all of our applications were ethical in the healthcare and AI space. So we looked at the 6 core principles that the World Health Organization designed, and we're going to apply these in our presentation. So these are the 6 stakeholders that we considered, and these are our 3 applications. We'll get right into it. Our first application is drug discovery. And so the problems in this area are it takes over $2 billion to produce a drug, and it takes over 10 years to come up with it. And so our application will help stakeholders in big pharma, providers, and patients. And so our application is for generative AI to get data about genomes and chemical compounds to help researchers come up with a better drug and help them come up with better chemical compositions. So the stakeholders, it will affect big pharma. It'll help them reduce costs and save time. It'll also help providers by offering better care to their patients. And for the patients, it'll be cheaper drugs because the cost to produce them would have decreased. So in the economy, it will help save costs of $28 billion each year, and this is a $50 billion market. And legal issues that might arise are patent eligibility and who has ownership of the AI-generated inventions, and then also liability in case of adverse effects. We conducted a survey of over 100 healthcare consumers to get an understanding of what they thought were ethical considerations in this application. And so 1 being the lowest concern and 5 being the highest concern, we got an average of 2.86 out of 5 concern for drug discovery. We also asked our survey participants to what are their 3 biggest ethical issues that they have with this space, and they said data privacy and security of personal information, bias and unrepresentative data, and overdependence on AI.
So getting into exactly what these ethical implications are, the number 1 is biased data. So obviously you're going to have underrepresented populations that may not be represented within this data, so the drug may not be applicable for all of these groups. Safety of personal information is the number 1 too when using AI, in that this information can be misaccessed and misused, and then incorrect therapeutic outcome. Arguably, this is the most dangerous because in the worst case scenario, it could lead to a life lost. So we talked to a professor at our university to get his insights into this application. He said, at the base, there's really no ethical issue. However, he wanted to make sure human checks are in place throughout this whole process. In terms of mitigation, so to mitigate the biased data set, there's a technique called data augmentation, where your data set is in addition to synthetic data to supplement that, and then this increases the quantity so that it isn't trained on any one particular pattern, and it can have patterns that are generalized, as well as increases the diversity of the data set. In terms of safety of personal information, just like the professor mentioned, having a system of checks is really important to make sure that there's human insight and oversight throughout every step of this process. And lastly, for incorrect therapeutic outcome, once again, human verification. Make sure that there are clinically statistical significant trials that supplement what the AI is saying. In terms of potential investments, we identified 3, but we'd like to really highlight the 3rd one because DeepMind, at the core of all of their technology, they really emphasize safety and ethics, and they have a good amount of revenue and a good valuation.
Our second application is matching consumers to health services. And so the problem is a lot of patients do not know about clinical trials or resources that they're eligible for, and a lot of underserved populations do not have access to a lot of free clinics and health services. And so this application will help different stakeholders, including medical researchers, providers, patients, the government, and health agencies. So this application is where patients can input some information into the generative AI about their medical history, et cetera, whatever they choose, and then they will be getting a list of curated resources that they're eligible for. So that could be a free clinic in the area, a medical trial if they're eligible for it, et cetera. So stakeholders that this will affect are patients because it'll help them find out about more resources that they are eligible for. And then health clinics and governments will have an increased turnout at their clinics and things like that. And then medical researchers will also get increased patients for their clinical trials. So this will help the economy by increasing the usage of hospitals and their clinical services, and this will also stimulate research. Legal implications are patient information being shared to AI, and then also, again, misinformation and liabilities in cases of errors. Again, we did the survey and we got a 2.81 out of 5 ethical concern, which is lower than drug discovery. And then the top 3 ethical concerns were bias and unrepresented data, data privacy of a person, and then also errors in outcome.
So going more into the ethical issues with errors and outcomes for this one, it could be that the data, the algorithm incorrectly assesses a patient data and matches them incorrectly to a service. That's actually not really useful for them. In terms of safety, personal information, once again, misaccessing and misusing this data. And lastly, for bias, this one's interesting because the algorithm could incorrectly assess demographic information and assign it to certain conditions or treatments that really aren't applicable. And once again, the professor mentioned a system of checks and human verification to validate that this individual actually needs the service. For mitigations for errors and outcomes, we really want to stress the quality of the data in the training. So to make sure that the data is trained on medical research and any sort of historical trends that are verified by the overall medical community, and to make sure that there's equal representation geographically and demographically. In terms of safety of personal information, access control, making sure that each stakeholder only gets as much information as they absolutely need as opposed to what they want. And then in terms of bias, once again, prioritizing that data collection and quantity, and also advertising efforts to niche your areas to increase the representation of those medical services in smaller areas. And potential investments are these 2 companies up on the screen. The one that we really want to highlight is Informatica because they have a 94% accuracy with their model. They have quite a few patient cases and a lot of successful checkups.
Our third application is health education. So a lot of problems in this area are a lot of med school students spend a lot of time studying versus actually getting hands-on practical training. And there's also a CME requirement that health professionals have to do to keep up to date on their medical knowledge as a professional. So our application will help providers as well as patients. So this application is where health professionals or students can input into the AI different topics that they want to study on, whether it's up-to-date topics or things that they're learning in their med school classes. And then the AI will give them flashcards or different study resources that they can use to stay up to date. So the stakeholders are providers and health institutions because they'll help them offer better quality care for their patients, and patients will in turn get better quality care. This is a $99.89 billion market, and because of the decrease in time used and money savings, this will stimulate more people in healthcare and medicine and more health professionals in general, and this will stimulate the economy. Legal implications are the CME and licensing requirements, making sure that they're up to date with AI standards, and then also misinformation and errors and outcome, those kinds of liabilities as well. So we asked the same question and we got a 2.89 out of 5 ethical concern. And the top 3 ethical concerns are overdependence on AI, misinformation, and errors and outcomes.
So to get deeper into this, we really want to stress the overdependence on AI, which is different than the other applications. So in this case, a consumer of this application might completely rely on the algorithm as opposed to getting other inputs from other resources, like other professionals going to conferences. They might just use this AI and call it a day, basically. And then once again, we have the misinformation and errors and outcomes, and that if the data is not trained in the correct way, the AI could respond incorrectly to questions that a student or a professional is asking, and then therefore these individuals are learning incorrect things. And lastly, once again, patient privacy. If an individual, like a healthcare provider or a student, enters sensitive information about another patient or someone that they're asking or trying to identify answers to, that could be a problem. And once again, the professor mentioned for this that human checks are really important, and also that this could result in a cookie cutter approach, which what he thinks could result in the dehumanization of healthcare, which is obviously at the core, healthcare is a very human industry. In terms of mitigations for the overdependence on AI, we really want to stress encouraging other resources. So making sure that the chatbot offers other resources that an individual can go to, other conferences, other videos or anything, and that these are mentioned whenever they ask a question. In terms of misinformation, we really want to stress the training and monitoring of the data, making sure that the data is up to date and trained. ChatGPT obviously is trained up until 2021. We want to make sure that this is trained continuously and is obviously up to date with the year that we're in, which is 2023. And in terms of patient privacy, really having an outlined and comprehensive guidelines of use, encouraging professionals and students not to put in this information and saying that it will not accept this information or store it anywhere. And in terms of potential investments, these are 2 of the following. They're pretty equal in terms of like revenue. They're not one stands out over the other. They're both pretty good.
So again, our 3 applications are drug discovery, matching consumers to healthcare, and health education. So our timeline for investing is health education in the next year, investing in drug discovery in the next 2 to 5 years, and investing in matching patients to resources in the next 5 to 8 years.
And lastly, for next steps, thank you. We're open to any questions.
Ready for your questions?
This is a three-part question. First, why is there algorithmic bias in healthcare data sets? Second, what are the potential consequences of algorithmic bias in healthcare? And third, how can fairness be established in healthcare with generative AI, such as ChatGPT, by utilizing the open science approach?
So getting to the first question, obviously there could be problems in the data if there isn't enough geographic or demographic representation, if the data isn't trained on up-to-date and verified sources by the whole medical community, as we mentioned in the presentation.
Some consequences that could happen if the data is biased is that there's not enough representation in the data. So, for example, in drug discovery, if there's not represented data of all populations, maybe the drug will not work for the entire population. It could have adverse effects for some people. And so this could happen, things like that, or different resources. If certain populations are not getting to know about resources that are available to them, and it's not in the data set, then that would also be a potential consequence of that.
And to be able to leverage OpenAI's open source, basically like open source, it's really important to get a lot of data from all sorts of research, from all different types of professionals in different fields within medicine. Obviously, medicine is really wide. There's psychology, there's sociology, there's all sorts of stuff. So making sure all of that's represented within, making sure all of that's represented within the data, and also getting data from other research articles that people may have written, and making sure that those articles are verified by other professionals within the online area. And then also another technique is the data augmentation, that to make sure that there could be other subsets of data that are more representative than just data that may be available online, because obviously that data can be incomplete, it could be inaccurate, so data augmentation can increase quantity as well as diversity of data. Thank you.